Happy Halloween and welcome to the Signal Watch. I'm your ghost, Ryan Steens. Once again, our cadre of co-contributors creep from the crypt for a spooktacular season of petrifying podcasts. We're reaching into our bag of tricks to line up some horrific treats in the phantasmagoric form of films that find a peculiar perspective on familiar frights. Stay terrified. We're going to try to make it work.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack. Bella Lugos is dead.
Happy Halloween and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your spooktacular host, Ryan Steens. And with me this creepy day is...
Oh, Simon Day. Hello. Just laughing because this is our third attempt starting this podcast.
We've had a few false starts getting going, but now we're going to do it this time. We're going to make it through.
Spooky gremlins in the system.
A spooky gremlin named Andre the dog. So yeah, we are talking today about which film?
We're doing, and I do apologize in advance for making you watch this, Vampira from 1974, directed by Clive Donner and starring David Niven, otherwise known as Old Dracula, because it shamelessly tried to cash in on Young Frankenstein, which had just come out and been a big success.
I was so glad I actually read that on Wikipedia about this movie, because I was like, it is so uncool to just be like, oh, David Niven, you're old Dracula.
Yeah.
Like, he looks fine, you know?
You're an old party Dracula. He's not even that old, really. He's like, I mean, what is he, like 50, 60, maybe?
Yeah, he's maybe 60. And anyway, it's I'm not entirely certain what the story is with how this movie came to be. It
seems to be trying to be a comedy. I say that with the greatest respect, but it's not remotely funny, really.
I'm curious, what made you? We were trying to figure out what we were going to do for this year for Halloween, and you were pretty late in the game when you said, "Oh, and we need to do Vampira." And so of course in the States, Vampira is associated with the movie Horror Hostess, and so
yeah,
I was like,
totally.
okay, well, I don't know. And then you said, well, it's also called Old Dracula, and I found it, and I was like, what the hell is this movie?
Well, I could bullshit you, but like it pretty much boils down to I was in Borders in London, which is a London bookshop, when I was there recently, and I saw it in the sale rack, and I was like, well, actually, it's a little bit deeper than that. It's slightly deeper than that, not much. So years ago, I remember we had a conversation a few years ago where you said you used to have a big horror book, like monsters and vampires.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, I had similar, if not the same book, and one of the black and white pictures in it was David Niven bending over Linda Hayden when she's kind of on the almost like the dentist kind of chair, and biting her. And I was like, David Niven, I've seen that old dude in other films. That old Dracula dude. He's not that old. And you know, and it looked a little bit weird, a little bit sexy, a little bit strange. And then jump forward 40 years, and I've finally seen the film. and it was totally not worth it.
So was this the first time you'd seen it? Was for this?
Yeah, I never ever remember this being shown on TV. And the other night, I think I enjoyed it more than I should have done. Weirdly, because just before it, I watched another film on Peacock called Saturday the 14th with Richard Benjamin, which again, as a child, I remember always seeing the video in video stores. And I was like, that looks amazing. That looks like a kind of a spoof of Friday the 13th. And it's going to have loads of TNA and loads of gore. And then I watched this film and it was like a bad, more than Rob Zombie bad episode of The Monsters. So I watched this film, was severely disappointed. All my childhood dreams were, sledgehammer to a window. And then afterwards, I watched Vampira, which didn't seem that bad after that.
Sure.
But it was, and it was funny because I was watching this as well. And like, I'd kind of forgotten what happened because I'd actually read years ago, excuse me, got mold allergies going on. I read years ago the synopsis of this. So I knew what happened at the end of Vampira, but I'd kind of forgotten it. And when I did, I felt like all those times I've said to you, we should do Soul Man. And you've gone, I'm not doing Soul Man. And I feel like I've snuck this in under your radar unfairly instead of Soul Man. And I didn't mean to do that, so I do apologize.
It's it's perfectly fine. We'll get to what happens at the end. But I don't know. So I'll say this: like, I was watching this and was like, this movie's not good from the first 5 minutes, and so
yeah.
I was kind of glad that's where my brain kind of settled. And, and keep in mind, like one of the last movies I watched was Elektra. So that at least was like a $50 million movie where you're just mad because they spent the money and it's dumb and whatever. And this is like, clearly this is Niven just having a good time because someone gave him money.
Yeah. He's having fun.
Yeah. And it's low stakes. It's very of its time.
It's a really sad kind of like example of where the British film industry was at the time, which is like caught somewhere between sexploitation movies and kind of like, the butt end, the cigarette butt end of horror, kind of like burning out. And it's like a terrible mishmash that, like John Landis always said about American Werewolf. He said, the problem is with horror comedies is they're either not funny or, they're not scary. And this was kind of like weirdly neither, I mean, if there hadn't been a couple of shots of boobs in this, I don't think this would even be a PG, because I think you could like stick a kid in front of this and they wouldn't care at all about it. They wouldn't get upset. There wouldn't be anything to, bother them, really.
No, the humor, I laughed maybe 3 times in this movie. One time was certainly
intentionally.
Yeah. When there were things in the movie, but the one that sticks out immediately is them putting the girl in the coffin, Helga in the coffin, and they're going to do her in. And I just kind of was like, okay, like,
yeah.
And there was a few other things like that I thought were kind of joke shaped. But for the most part, it's just really a light adventure of Dracula. And so just a quick plot synopsis, because nobody's going to have seen this damn thing.
Nobody's going to know what we're talking about.
So you found it in England. I watched it. It was available. Amazon has all those channels. This one was on something called Screen Picks, and I could watch it for free with a 7-day trial. So I did. The plot is what is it? South Coast Media plot synopsis. I almost said Suncoast Media. South Coast Media plot synopsis is that David Niven is Dracula. He's turned Castle Dracula into, and you're gonna hear how they thought this was a comedy as I describe it. He's turned it into like a horror themed bed and breakfast, and like rich people from England come and do photo shoots and stuff there. And so he's having a dinner in his house, and he's lamenting to his manservant that his wife has been on ice for 50 years and he misses her so.
That's kind of shades of Dr. Phibes, I thought. It
totally Dr. Phibes, yes.
Yeah.
And he gathers the blood. He can't find the right blood type because it's an old Transylvanian blood type. And one of these women has it, and who's arrived for this dinner party. It's a bunch of Playboy playmates and a guy whose job I could never figure out. Who's
was that the guy who's supposed to be their manager, the really tall guy?
No. I knew what he was. Pioneer. I understood what he was supposed to be. It was Mark, whose job he was really interested in Dracula, but I couldn't figure out, like, is he an author? Is he like, what is he?
He was an international Playboy baby.
Yeah, but he was at the center of all these photo shoots that they were doing, which I didn't get. And
it was weird because he was like, "You're right." I mean, like, what was his job? Because he seemed to be like an author on vampire legend.
Maybe,
but I'm like, I don't think. I mean, A, that's not a sustainable job, I don't think, and B, why would he have gone with those girls unless he just kind of wanted to perv and just hang out with them? But they seem to like be like, oh no, it's it's okay that he's here. That's normal,
Yeah. So one of the four women is black, who's there. This is important for plot stuff. And that's when we get into the very dated nature of this movie. This movie is 75. Is that right? 1975?
74, yeah.
74. So the Dracula he drugs all of the women. There's all this stuff that feels like super like roofies in this.
It's the dodgy as well.
And he does a blood draw from all the women, and he checks it at the lab, and Dracula has a lab as you would expect, and
it's kind of like a Bond villain.
But he doesn't know which of the women is the right woman, but he knows he can do the blood transfusion and blah blah blah. But when he does the blood transfusion, his wife becomes a black woman.
Yeah. She's not blacked up, thankfully. She's actually played by an African-American actress, and a very good actress. I thought she was very good in the role.
It's Teresa Graves. And frankly, I'll be candid. I thought you had seen this before and we were watching it, so you could be like, check out Teresa Graves.
No. She was one of the few pleasant highlights of this, I thought, because she actually was really into it and had some energy. I think her, the manservant, and Niven kind of saved this film, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were trying to do something, and they understood the job. She went from like, she was supposed to be a woman who kind of adopted to the times. She comes out as a flapper because she's been dead for 50 years and immediately adopts 70s culture, counterculture.
Like a Blaxploitation movie, doesn't she?
You're right. She goes to go see like a Richard Roundtree movie or something, and comes out and she starts calling Dracula. Called Dracula jive turkey. I thought was the other time I laughed.
Yeah, that was good.
And
she should have gone to see Blackula, really.
I think I was a little. I'm sure they considered it and probably like that's a little too on the nose, but but it's. I mean, all of it sounds like it is progressive for 1974. Is I think the best thing I can say about it.
Yeah,
it reminded me a lot of. There's a famous issue of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane called "I Am Curious Black." And it is Lois Lane puts herself into a machine at the Fortress of Solitude where she becomes black for like 48 hours.
They're running low on Superman ideas at this point. Honestly.
Oh yeah, I mean but they were trying to do this like social issue where she was going to like go into the black community in the city, and we're going to show the readers like what's going on, and I mean, it reads exactly as you would expect with modern eyes, but it's also now this like kind of famous / infamous comic issue.
Yeah.
I have a copy. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I saw the cover on that thing and was like, oh, that's insane. I'm buying that. So it,
well, at this time also, you got to remember that, you know, James Bond was flirting with Blaxploitation, and
mm-hmm.
you know, it was for 2 or 3 years, it was big stuff, you know.
And, you know, the first thing that Dracula says, our kind of point of view character, is when he takes a look at her and goes, oh, well, you're different now. And he literally says, but black is beautiful, like, which was a big thing to say back then.
I was actually pleasantly surprised that, you know, Niven's kind of, you know, Dracula wasn't played for like, oh my God, you know, we've got to cure you. You know, it's more like, you know, it was more like, you know, basically, I just want my wife back as she was, but you do look very nice as you are. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just like, you know, but obviously we don't really fit in, you know. And even at the end, they're like, well, let's go, you know, we're off to Rio to the carnival, you know, we're going to have some fun.
Yeah. You got the feeling they weren't. The issue was supposed to be more that the neighbors in Transylvania would know something was up.
Yeah.
Because something would have changed. So, anyway, so they go to England to go find these women again, and thus we get to London. Yeah, and then it's kind of like these.
Well, there's only 4 women as well, and like there's only 1 black woman. So I'm like, is it really this hard to like work out which vial you should be using?
Well, but the vial in the end that actually solves the problems from Veronica Carlson, or is supposed to. So they never. No, none of it makes sense. The last 5 minutes of the movie is just complete and utter nonsense. Because
also, if you spoke kind of spoilers here, but obviously at the end, if you're bitten, you wouldn't turn black because your blood is being sucked away, isn't it?
I don't, man. This movie in the last 5 minutes wanted a few things to happen, and so they're like, it doesn't matter, this is what's happening in our kooky movie.
We shouldn't try to rationalize it, but
yeah, so there's a lot of stuff where they play a lot of the vampire stuff for laughs, where they're Dracula basically like makes this guy Mark his thrall, and go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, well, they're kind of serious about some things, like, you know, sunlight, aren't they? They're actually like, they kind of like do make a big fuss about, you know, they'll die if they're hit by sunlight, and then other things are kind of played for laughs, really.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually a scene, you know, of course, it's a problem for the vampires to travel because they always are supposed to need their coffins, and the manservant busts out these collapsible travel coffins, and that was the third thing I laughed at was the collapsible travel coffin. I was like, brilliant, I love it.
And then they move into this, like, I guess, like this house that was owned by a Satanist, or you know, a house that had, like, you know, a horrible history.
It had a real house that dripped blood sort of vibe to it.
Yeah. And then, I guess the last third of the film kind of gets into like hypnosis, dodgy film hypnosis of them hypnotizing Mark to kind of do their bidding, really.
Yeah. So Simon said kind of at the beginning, like, you know, this is kind of its era, and you're kind of expecting some sexploitation out of it.
I was hoping for some. I was hoping to wake up.
And everything about this movie screams that is going to happen. It does not.
Well, there's even a couple of girls who, like, you know, because Mark's supposed to be like, you know, and it's funny because, like, as an English person, so many of these actors I've seen in dodgy sitcoms, including Nicky Henson, who plays Mark. I mean, he's like, you know, he was almost like Medallion Man in the 70s, the mid 70s. He was like a proto BG, you know, for a while on TV. Okay. So he's supposed to be the ultimate male, British male, you know, because like his shirt's undone, he's got a hairy chest and whatever. So all these girls are throwing themselves at him, and and quite quickly, removing their tops, and then nothing happens. Or we cut away, and I'm like, this is like, this really doesn't, it's like I said earlier, it's kind of like bait and switch. It's like promising kind of titillation, but then not really delivering.
Yeah, it's a deeply unsexy movie for a movie that kind of pitches itself as like, this is going to be sexy at the beginning. It's like, here comes like 4 gorgeous girls. Oh, we just added another gorgeous girl.
Playboy bunnies, aren't they? Isn't
they're
Playboy
supposed to be, yeah. And I mean, they clearly got permission to use Playboy in like the Playboy Club in London at the time.
Yeah.
But they spend all this time rather screwing around with like a dumbwaiter. And
well, there's also a really weird scene in the middle with Carol Cleveland, who was like the kind of female. I think saying stooge is unfair because she was like the female member, if you like, of Monty Python. So so she's one of the nuns in Holy Grail, who were like, oh, please stay at the castle, when Michael Payne's trying to leave. But basically she's in this weird little scene where she kind of gets robbed and then almost raped in a car park, and by weirdly a very young Kenneth Branagh, who went on to play like gangsters, and he played Dr. Chennard in Hellraiser 2. But he's incredibly young. But then Niven turns up and kind of saves her, and they drive around in a car for a little bit, and then she just drops him off. I'm like, what was the point in any of that?
Yeah, it was a strange scene. It was like they needed to have him do something to explain why he had to come through the window later.
Yeah.
and it was bizarre. But yeah, they initially are staying in a hotel when they get there, and the maid closes the window, so he has to go in through somebody else's window, and it's wacky.
She tells her not to, doesn't he? Doesn't he specifically say?
Well, he tells his manservant to keep the window open, but the maid comes in while the manservant's apparently not around. So it there's a lot of, like I said, joke-shaped things that kind of occur throughout, and none of it like really lands. But like weirdly at the end of it, I was like, it's all right. I wasn't like mad. No. It had kind of unfolded. The pacing on it was a little weird. It just felt like it never really had highs or lows. It just kind of kept happening.
It felt like it was made like a lot of horror around this time by old men trying to be down with the kids. So that's why this time, in like Dracula 1972 AD and stuff, you always have these like 20-year-olds hanging out at milk bars, drinking milkshakes and listening to jazz records. It's like no 20-year-old would be caught dead doing that. They'll all be off having sex and getting drunk and smoking spliffs. But like apparently in like horror films, that's what they do.
Dracula 72 is so good.
It's like a cousin to that kind of,
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely thought about that when we were watching it, of like, so Dracula 72 came out and they still decided to make this movie. Like,
yeah,
all right,
it's like that didn't work. Let's do it again. And I mean, it was kind of fun seeing all the different actresses and whatever, because like we said, there was Linda Hayden in there who, kind of like had it sewn up as playing like little sex pot teenagers for a while in the early 70s. She was in a couple of Hammer films, and her big one was Blood on Satan's Claw, where she's the leader of the children in that movie, kind of strips off in front of the priest. There's Bernard Bresslaw, who he's got a very thankless role in this as the kind of manager of the girls, who just keeps doing like wife jokes, really bad wife jokes. Like, it reminds me of my wife's cooking and stuff like that. And you probably know him, Ryan, subconsciously as Roll the Cyclops from Kroll.
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh, it was driving me insane. Yes. Okay, I feel much better now. Like I kept looking at him, going, I know that guy. I know, and the voice, because I just watched Crawl like 2 months ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's like he basically and he was in all the Carry On movies like through the 60s and 70s. And then Veronica Carlson, who of course did a couple of Hammers, a Dracula and a Frankenstein. We mentioned Carol Cleveland, Kenneth Cranham, Jenny Linden, who was in the Doctor Who movie with Peter Cushing. So lots and lots of kind of like famous British faces in this, but just it didn't really add up to some of its parts, really.
Yeah, I don't have any numbers for like box office or anything. I read Ebert when it came to the States gave it 1 out of 4 stars. So the only thing he liked was David Niven, and he was just basically kind of confused, like, why is this movie happening? I think for American audiences, like, unless you're like in the soup with knowing a bunch about Hammer. I mean, Jenny Linden looked like really familiar, and I wasn't really sure why that would have been. Teresa Graves was an American doing an English accent through this. She was this was her last acting role. Wow. She had been on a show called I can find this real fast. Get Christy Love, which I'd heard of. But apparently what happened was sometime after filming Old Dracula and before Get Christy Love, she found religion.
Oh dear.
And became
she didn't she like Jehovah's Witness? She became
a Jehovah's Witness and went really hard at that, and basically like started saying like, well, I'm not going to perform any violence. I'm not going to do anything sexy. And they're like, you're on, and I'm not going to tell any lies.
Well, you're in the right film then, basically.
Yeah. Well, forget Christy Love. She was supposed to be an undercover cop who was doing like sexy time stuff. And so suddenly they were like, we just basically can't do this show. So I'm sure she
was like a bit of a Pam Grier kind of ripoff a little bit,
Yeah. I mean, there was a few actresses they tried to roll out at this time, around the Blaxploitation era, and 74, 75 would have definitely been this period. But she basically, like, after that, never did anything again and went off to become a minister at a Jehovah's Witness church, and that's what she did pretty much until she died. And sadly, in a house fire, apparently she died well before her time in 2002.
Well, she's great. Actually, that's a shame, because I think she like I say, she's one of the jolts of life in this, really. Because every time she comes on, especially when she goes a bit AWOL and starts ignoring Niven and doing her own thing, and kind of like I guess like she tries to like bite Mark or seduce Mark. All that was kind of cool, I thought.
Yeah, I thought she was really good. And it's she probably would have ended up as some sort of, knowable, bankable star in the US had she, but she'd been before this one of the like bikini girls on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. So she was on this like really quick trajectory to kind of become something, and just kind of opted out, kind of just as her star was rising. But aside from that, like, there's just not much for Americans to grab onto here. No one here is super knowable, but of course Niven.
Well, I know you're a fan of Nicky Hansen because, of course, he played the leader of the motorbike gang in Psychomania.
Oh my God, he did.
Mother. What's the secret of the locked room, Mother? So which is a much better film than this, I think, a much more entertaining film. But yeah, that shows how diminished and small the pool of British talent was at this time. I think the fact that these guys turn up in every film, whatever the quality, which makes me actually a bit surprised that Niven was in this. Unless he wasn't really getting any offers either, and he just went, okay, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really read anything as to why he took the role, or was he friends with the producers, like those sorts of things. All I could think was, he'd done James Bond already at this point,
Yeah,
and had kind of enjoyed doing, I guess, some comedy stuff, and it was a chance to kind of,
hang out with some lovely young ladies,
and do some jokes and be in London for,
yeah,
probably could come in from his house and work for the day and go home.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's probably
so
enough.
it was a paycheck. So, and you never know how a movie's really going to turn out.
No.
But
So
yeah,
what
I
about
mean,
the ending? We're avoiding it like the elephant in the room, but what about this ending?
shall I describe what happens? Is
You
this
describe it.
okay?
Use your subtle wording.
So they're doing the final blood transfusion now that they know who had the right blood. And for some reason, in the middle of the transfusion, they realize it hasn't worked. She hasn't reverted to her former look as a, white Romanian. And they're kind of looking back and forth at each other. And then she leans up and bites Dracula on the neck unprovoked, which she should be full of blood at this point. So I don't know why she suddenly decides she's hungry or out of her mind or whatever happens here.
Maybe it just excites her, all the blood. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. And so they kind of cut away and they say, oh, and you see a shot of a black guy's hand. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah, because
And
it kind of like, first of all, you think they're not going to go the whole way, are they? They're just going to tease it.
yeah,
Um, and that looked like a blacked up. That didn't look like a real black hand to me. That looked like a blacked up hand. So I'm like, oh dear,
yeah.
Because if they'd have actually got a black actor in, I think, and maybe just had Niven dub the voice, even that probably would have been preferable to what we get.
Well, right, because there's a chase scene, a kind of faux chase scene, as Vampira and Dracula are going to go to Rio and go have a good time. And Mark is chasing them through the streets on his scooter, catches up with them just as they're entering the doors at Heathrow.
One of the most rubbish chasers ever.
And he's like, that man, I can't remember, accuses him of something in front of the cops. Yeah. And he turns around and it's Niven in the worst blackface I have ever seen in my life. Like it wasn't even a brown tone. It was like they used like
boot polish or something. So.
Yeah, like boot polish. And it's insane to look at. It's that anyone was like, yep, let's shoot that. And I completely, and he says like, do I look like I'm from Romania? And the cops are like, oh, let this man go. And
you're like David Niven blacked up. I mean, it's so stupid. I'm not even sure if it's offensive. I mean, I'm sure some people would be offended, but it's just so utterly ridiculous.
I kind of am of the same, like, it's so bad and so stupid. Like, it's offensive, of course, because that was the choice they made, but it's more offensive because it's so stupid.
But I presume no African American would be offended by it at the time, because no African American would be called dead watching this film. And not many white people either.
Yeah, I mean, it does tell you, like, you're just on the end of that cusp where someone could do something like that. Now, I will say this, like, well, one, I took Jamie and I talked about it after. We were like, was there any successful way to do that? And we're like, well, the only thing they could have done was to have, like you said, a black guy, and then have Niven overdub him. And that, it's still on some level not a whole lot better, but it's still better than, of course, putting Niven in, just making it stupid on top of everything else.
Well, also
But
because also I think isn't Vampira played by a different actress when she's white? So that seems more jarring when she changes.
mhm.
Whereas with Niven, the fact that he doesn't change, he just kind of blacks up, kind of like almost kind of like emphasizes that as well. Really?
Yeah, I was going to go back and I forgot to do it, to go back and look, because we kind of had that same conversation after the movie ended. And I was like, or was it her in like makeup, but she was supposed to be frozen, so I didn't notice, or I wasn't really looking at her. And look, I never actually checked it out to be sure. And I didn't see any credits for Frozen Vampira or anything like that.
Yeah.
The what I did think about and was a film they showed us in film school, and this is a stretch, so just bear with me.
Yeah.
It was a movie called Watermelon Man. It was a Blaxploitation comedy, or a comedy that was created by black comedians and directors and all that. And the premise of it was a white guy living in the burbs, and he's played by a black guy to start with, and they have him in whiteface. And he's, typical white guy, racist, whatever, an asshole. And he wakes up one morning and he's black. And it's a social comedy, and all the stuff he goes through. And over the course of the film, it goes from being kind of funny to being kind of more of a drama of him as he goes beyond empathizing. And, of course, his wife starts to see him as a different person, even though and that's the whole thing, is he's the same person, but how does everybody see him? And this movie doesn't go for any of that, because it immediately goes for, a Vampira is a hot lady.
Yeah.
there's no, she's going to just cruise. She's a hot lady. And they don't make an issue of it as like a racist issue.
Well, it's almost Austin Powersy, isn't it? It's like, yeah, baby, I'm black now. Yeah.
Right.
And then she wants to party all night,
Yeah. And because it's the 70s, it's in swinging London, it's just, they don't have to treat it as an issue, but they do leverage some of that stuff there at the end. I think it was like, it's always weird to watch these movies that are probably progressive at the time, just doing some things that, as the kids would say, are just cringe. But the roughest thing is the whole rest of the movie isn't good enough for you to go like, well, it's got this one thing that you're going to cringe at. It's like, well, it's not a very good movie. And then at the end, it does this thing. So it's a really hard one to recommend to anybody.
Well, it's, and it's, I mean, it's the same thing, when I watched kind of Soul Man a couple of years ago, and which we'll probably never podcast. But it's like with that, the end message was like kind of a good one. It was actually saying, be yourself, and we should all be treated the same and whatever. But the problem was, to get there, that had a couple of like massively cringeworthy scenes in the middle of it, where like, the dad's looking at him, and like, really there's some real kind of like racial stereotypes coming out. And I was like, yeah, you kind of like, you're preaching one thing, but you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot with the other one.
Yeah.
So, it's very hard to like, take seriously.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, like, that's within our lifetime. I was in like middle school when Soul Man came out. And
because we've said this, we've had this conversation before, haven't we? Where we've kind of said, we grew up, quite happily in the 80s, thinking we were, on the edge of enlightenment. And when you look back now, you're like, it's like it was terrible. There was like, every single film, like during lockdown, I was kind of saying to you, I was watching all these like, even Bill and Ted, every kind of like Hollywood movie had like, hey, that guy's a fag. Yeah, he looks like a fag. And I'm like, well, even Bill and Ted are doing that. Come on, it's like, it didn't look so at the time because it was the norm. It
is certainly, I am not sure what from today will be in 20, 30 years will be the same sort of thing. But it is one of those things that I find really fascinating about film in general, whether it's a good movie or a bad movie, is you get what was going on in the culture at that time in so many levels, and why it's worth going back and watching movies, even if they're not the best, even if they're old Dracula, which, by the way, I still think sounds like the worst, like bottom shelf bourbon, like old Dracula.
It's not a title that like installs confidence, is it? It's kind of like, and I kind of get what they were trying to do. I think he was very lucky to be double billed with Young Frankenstein, because I just hope for its sake that it was the first one shown on the bill, because nobody would have stayed after Young Frankenstein to watch this, I don't think. Or they would have watched the first 10 minutes, At a
drive-in, it's the one you show while the sun's still going down.
Yeah, where people are getting their hot dogs and popcorn and stuff. Yeah.
then we'll settle in for Young Frankenstein. But yeah, I'm shocked it got any kind of release here. I'll be totally honest. I mean, not because of the quality, but I think, usually if something gets released here, there's something in it, and Niven would have been that thing. It's the only thing I can think. Like,
yeah.
But I guess it got released here. So I just there's a reason you've never heard of it. But I've definitely seen more painful movies for sure.
I mean, it wasn't troubling even. It was just it was almost non-threatening, Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of wish it had more sex and gore, but then maybe Niven would have just not fitted into that at all, and it would have seemed like a really uncomfortable mix. Because obviously his wheelhouse and his comfort zone is kind of like, charming comedy or slightly cheeky comedy. And that's what he was doing. So, so maybe this was about as far as they could push those boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think it could have been more fun as, like a little more R-rated. But it is what it is. So
that photo I saw many years ago promised me so much, and failed to deliver completely.
Yeah, it is. It might be worth watching the first 15 minutes when they're still in Dracula's castle, because there are some strong like Dr. Phibes vibes between his weird bed that goes into the wall and with the glass lid, and like the organist going. I literally, when I saw the organist going, wondered if they repurposed the set from Dr. Phibes, but I don't think they did. And kind of some of the gags they have that, it's supposed to be funny that Dracula's hosting this dinner, but it's just such awkward pacing through the whole thing that nothing really lands.
It's partly because he's playing himself, but then he's dressing up as Dracula. So he's actually dressing up as Dracula, even though he is Dracula at other points, which is weird. But then his manservant's dressing up as Dracula as well. And then actually even Mark's dressing up as Dracula. So it's like, it kind of I guess deflates any threat or any real meaning,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge joke there, but they just hadn't done enough to set the thing up. By the time there was no grand reveal of Dracula as coming out in the wig after we've seen him as David Niven, he just kind of is in a scene and you realize, oh, he's wearing the wig. There's no bump bump. They go for more for oh, your wig is slipping way late in the scene.
Yeah.
And whoever directed it and edited it just didn't seem to have a real feel for how do you draw a laugh.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I would probably, I would think is the kind of thing you can stick on a party in the background, early at the start of the party, and just have it playing just because it is kind of Halloween-y, It probably wouldn't really offend anybody, maybe,
no.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a couple of shots of boobs, but I mean, they're so quick, But I mean, like, yeah, really, I think, if you turn it off before the last 10 minutes, you should be all right.
But yeah, this is the first one of these we're doing. We're going to be hitting a few other versions of Dracula that Simon has he'll be curating and he's selected for us.
So we should say what we're doing, shouldn't we? Because
Go for it. Yeah, please.
I forgot to say that early on. We're doing like kind of strange or weird versions of classics. So, so not just your straight Draculas or your straight Frankensteins or Dr. Jekylls, but weird twists, something a little bit different about them.
Yeah, we have. If this is your first time to the podcast because you like love old Dracula, I'm sorry that we just eviscerated your movie, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in the playlists on our SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/signalwatch, where if you go to the playlist, there's a whole Halloween and horror section, and we've covered the classics. So don't worry about that. We've got Hammer Dracula. We've got Universal Dracula. We have Son of Dracula. We have the whole 9 yards. So we're doing this year. I'm really excited about it. And I hope that y'all will continue to come back and join us for more Draculas.
And the films will get better.
Maybe. I don't know how they could.
God, I hope so.
All right, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.